Hi there, this is Erik Egelko, and I am super excited to announce episode 5 of the Easy Deals podcast. All right, we are back. Today, I am very excited and privileged to have a highly esteemed guest and a longtime friend of mine. Michael Chen is the Director of Client Relations for Kimball, Tirey, St. John, California's leading eviction firm. Michael, thank you to the show, or thank you for being on the show.
Thank you, Erik. It's fantastic to be here. Thank you for having me.
So Michael and I have actually known each other for almost 10 years. We were in the Toastmasters Club together here in San Diego, and both of us have pursued careers in real estate and experienced success in completely different components of the business. Michael, for the people who don't know you, why don't you tell us a bit about your current role and what it is that you do?
Sure. Thank you so much, Erik. So I'm Michael Chen. I work for the law offices of Kimball, Tirey, and St. John, also known as KTS for short. As Erik mentioned, we're a real estate law firm for property managers as well as landlords. We've been around for nearly half a century with over 100 attorneys. We're statewide from Northern California to Southern California. Now, I'm not an attorney with the firm. That's not my role. I do have a California attorney's license and a New York attorney's license. But my role is really with the client care team. My title is Director of Client Relations. So my job is really to make sure our clients have an excellent experience, starting with a great onboarding experience, helping setting up the clients for success, to serving as a point of contact for all of our clients. In terms of what we do, as I mentioned, we're a full service real estate law firm. So we're best known for our evictions, but we also do collections. It's all real estate debt, no credit card, anything like that. We've covered over $235 million to date. We've, you know, represented clients in front of every bankruptcy judge in the state. Our fair housing department's defending against more fair housing complaints, which is a huge thing nowadays, than any other firm. And we also have an education department that does seminars, workshops, and focuses on preventive law to help prevent lawsuits. That's you don't want to call us when you're in trouble. We want to prevent lawsuits, prevent eviction. So that's a little bit about me and my firm.
Yeah, I'll tell you, it's no one is excited for an eviction or for reaching out to an attorney, but when these things do happen, we are very fortunate to have Michael and his team available to us, so that we can navigate these situations when they occur. So Michael, I'd like to get a bit more into your background, just because before the show, you're telling me some super entertaining stories about getting started in real estate. So why don't you take us sort of from the journey, sort of from the very beginning up until where you are
Up in the beginning, all right. I was born down by the river. um, in terms of real estate, so I'm actually a third generation real estate investor. Real estate's in my blood. My grandfather owned land in Taiwan, which is this tiny little island in Asia where land is a premium. He was a developer. And my parents were developers as well. They developed cul-de-sacs, little residential areas, planned developments. They also owned income property, so multifamily office buildings, and they were an owner broker of a Remax franchise. And I would grow up trying to collect rent in these economically depressed areas. We'll call it that, where tenants wouldn't pay rent and they would call my parents in the middle of the night. They were not very good landlords. And I just grew up hating real estate. I didn't want to get involved in it. Eventually, I went to law school, and I didn't want anything to do with real estate. Real property, not my thing. Just, didn't want anything to do with real estate. I was interested in sales. So when I was in law school, I used to work for this company that sold comedy club tickets in the streets of Times Square. Which is the most difficult sales you can ever do because everybody in New York thinks that if a stranger comes up to them, you're gonna mug them. And so I had to come up with different strategies to stop people. That was my introduction to really interacting with people and selling things. And I remember my first day there. I was just looking to get some extra money. I was, poor in law school, and I sold 10 books, which was a record for the company in one day. This was 1999 ish, $20 a book. It's pretty tough to sell. It could be a complete scam, right? But I learned little things, little tricks, like if people are walking by and you touch their arm, it actually I was told it initiates a flight or flight response and people freeze. So then you stop and then you can talk to them. That was my first lesson in business and sales. You got to get people's attention. You got to get people to stop and listen to you. So I did that for a while. I worked for a company called Legal Match, which sold advertising packages to law firms. I was a 20-something-year-old kid um, making a bunch of money on these commissions. But I went to law school. I didn't want to do any real estate. I was interested in sales. When I got out, I ended up working. I actually started my own firm, I was working for comic book companies, etc. But my introduction to real estate was this other law firm that approached me to help type up contracts. In New York, it's different from California. They don't have the trust deed system. Attorneys do closings. And so I was helping him. And that's when I started thinking, oh, maybe real estate's something I might want to do. Um, and around that time, again, because my background in sales, I got into business brokerage. Unlike California and New York, at that time there was no license needed. You didn't need to be a real estate broker. So I was selling Main Street businesses like restaurants and laundromats and things like that. And I can tell you some stories about that too.
Yeah,
But from there,
let me ask you about the business brokerage, just because we get solicited from time to time to sell businesses, and it's not something that my company does. I have found that most businesses are not really sellable. That owners kind of have this misconception on the value of their business. Based on your experience in business brokerages, how do you evaluate the value of a business? What is a business that is sellable versus a business that's not sellable?
Well, it's actually selling business is very similar to real estate. If you represent a seller, many times in real estate, they're not realistic on their value. They might look it up at Zillow, or they might say, "I paid X amount. It's been this many years. The neighbor sold for this. I want this." Right. So many times businesses are not sellable for the same reason why real estate isn't sellable, which is the price, basically. And the thing that business owners don't understand is that businesses really aren't valued the same way as real estate. It's basically small businesses are evaluated based on cash flow. So not on some. I mean, there are different formulas. If you're what I call a lazy business broker, you'll create a selling price based on gross revenue, which is not. Yeah, so, for example, rule of thumb, let's say I'm going to sell a law firm, right? 1 to 2 times gross revenue. Well, different people have different net revenue. You have to get what's called seller's discretion and cash flow. What at the end of the day is coming into your pocket in terms of cash. And for small businesses, there's different formulas, there's different multiples. So if you're netting 50,000 and it's XYZ type of business, you might multiply it by 2 or 3, and you will come up with a rough estimate there. We're not doing this isn't high end mergers and acquisitions where you're getting an EBITDA and you get these audits and things like that. But it's really based on cash flow. And many times these businesses, they come in, they say, I want $1 million. I remember one time I was trying to sell a bar and the guy said, I want $1 million. And I said, where'd you come up with that number? He said, because I deserve it. I think this is $1 million business. And you have, just like in real estate, you have to, if you're in brokerage, you have to explain to them how things are valued, whether it's comps or however you came up with the value. And sometimes there I can tell you stories about how once business owners know that, they can they try to cheat the system. So
Yeah, no, I have found that property owners oftentimes have this like greatly inflated sense of what their property is worth, and they'll, I met with a guy in National City the other week who has a building that he said, I want $3 million for this building, and he had bought it 2 years earlier for 1.2. So obviously, the 2 years it's not going to go up to $3 million, and he says, I'm not selling this thing until I can get $3 million, and I said, eventually with inflation, and 20 years from now, it'll be worth $3 million. I'm not saying it's not, but in today's math, that's just not going to work.
Yeah, many times these sellers, they have unrealistic expectations. But when I was selling businesses, people would try to get sneaky. I dealt with a lot of business owners, and in the restaurant world, they have different formulas. It's X times, 3 times cash flow, whatever it is. And once I was dealing with this restaurant owner who figured out that not just me, but buyers were going to value his restaurant based on how much money he was making, not just based on what he wanted. So what he did was he tried to pull a trick, which was he tried to inflate things. Now, the thing with the restaurant business, any cash business, small business that has, they have cash books, and they have books that they give to the IRS. And so it's difficult to figure out. It's not like you come and do a real audit. So what the due diligence process looks like for a small business is, if, for example, in the restaurant industry, they'll count the number of customers that come in, or in the laundromat business, they'll calculate the average number of turns per machine. Well, in this particular case, he knew a buyer was sitting outside his car, and he saw him, and so he would pay kids and his friends to come in through the front door and come out the back door, because he knew the buyer was counting the number of people that were coming into the business. He'd fill these trash bags full of newspapers to make it seem like he had all this, waste from, trying to work the system. People do crazy things.
Yeah, it's almost comical sometimes, the unsophisticated fraudulent owner, because it's like it's so obvious what you're doing. If you're gonna try to bamboozle me, at least have a little bit of class, and then have a more sophisticated strategy. Anyways, you had some great anecdotes about some early real estate investments that you made. Why don't you tell us a bit about this fourplex that you had bought?
Oh gosh. Actually, sometimes I wish I could forget about it. But I learned a lot of lessons from that. So this was a number of years ago. I decided that I wanted to become, a heavy duty real estate investor, and investing in single family homes, condos wasn't going to cut it. And just keep in mind, I was putting on seminars. I was a real estate broker by that time with Coldwell Banker, and I was putting on seminars for investors. And I was telling myself, why am I not doing this, right? So I eventually found a small apartment building, a fourplex in Ontario, California. It was on the MLS, and it was owner financing, and that was music.
The people who don't know, how would you describe Ontario as an area?
Well, there's what I would write on a description, and if I listed it, and then there was there's the reality of it that I lived through it. So let me give you. And so by that time, I was working at a law school there, and I found this fourplex down the street. And my first day of work, because I had never been to Ontario before, someone told me, "Oh, don't go to the Carl's Jr. for lunch." This was broad daylight, noon. And I said, why not? You don't like fast food? I said, no, somebody shot somebody, and there was a murder at the Carl's Jr. at noon in public, in broad daylight. That may give you a little bit of flavor. It's not, it's okay. I mean, I've lived there for a little while, but it's it's not Beverly Hills. We'll say that. In fact, the fourplex that I eventually purchased was full of gang members. I won't say which gang there, but face tattoos, things like that. And they were very nice to me, but I didn't have a property manager at that time, and so I was there. I would go to work at the law school, and I would go down the street afterwards to work on the property, to try to increase its value, to maybe sell it later. I guess they call it value added nowadays. And because I was dealing with them, and I would see them, they would trade guns in the garage. I would be fixing the garage door opening because I was on my own handyman, and they would, trade guns, in front of me. And it would be difficult when I would try to collect rent. So that was a lesson that I learned. Sometimes when it comes to management, it's nice to have an intermediary there. But yeah, that was an very interesting apartment. there was an extreme pest control issue, and I didn't know how to deal with it. That we had roaches, right? So as a landlord, of course, as soon as you're notified to prevent liability, you want to get pest control in there. They're spraying everything, but these things they must have multiplied by the thousands overnight. And so I went in. I was trying to figure out what was going on. I went to one of the units, and oh my gosh, they had cake underneath the refrigerator and open bags, multiple bags of sugar on the counter. A cold pizza like on the floor, and I'm telling them, they only spoke Spanish, and I don't speak Spanish, so I was trying to communicate through Google Translate that they can't, that this is the problem. Like, we can spray, but this isn't, and they would tell me stories through Google Translate about how at night the bugs would crawl on what they called their babies' faces. They were toddlers, and it was just
oh my God.
You can't, you do what you can as a landlord, but sometimes your tenants have to work with you. That's probably, now knowing what I know now, that's probably a situation where I should have issued a legal notice. But yeah, it was not easy.
Yeah, I'll tell you. Oftentimes, people look at these deals that I would say are in like a C or D location, and the math looks fantastic. I can buy this at a 6 cap on existing income. But what people don't factor in is all of these intangible management problems. That it really is far from a passive investment when you buy some of these lower end properties.
Absolutely. Especially, I had to evict. It was terrible. But the reason why I purchased this, other than the fact that it was owner financing, was the fact that the cap rate was over 10%. I think it was like 11 or 12%. And if you figured out like the cash on paper, right? I was, I never have to work another day in my life, But the actual reality of it was, with the repairs, dealing with tenants, it was just not worth it. It was just not worth it. So, yeah.
So the owner financing is a topic I love talking about, just because I sort of nerd out on creative deal structures. Do you remember what the specs were in terms of the down payment and the amortization on this deal?
What I remember was it was just like going to the bank, except I didn't have to qualify. So I put a certain amount of cash down, and then the prevailing interest rate that was just published at that time that I paid to the owner. It wasn't like, prime plus whatever. It wasn't something crazy. It was just like normal. It's just that I didn't have to qualify, because at that time I had other mortgages. I wouldn't have qualified if I went to a bank. And that was the main lesson that I learned. If a bank won't qualify you, you probably shouldn't get into the deal, because I was really stressing about money for a few years there. I mean, I was living, I didn't even, here I am, I'm owning a small apartment complex, and I'm living, as a roommate inside a condo with other people without my own bathroom because I couldn't afford it, right? I'm wearing clothes from 7th grade. It's just, is the Dollar Tree open? And that's why I sold it eventually. It just didn't make sense. So that was a big lesson I learned. If a bank can't qualify you, there's probably a reason for that. That doesn't mean that there are a million other creative deals that can be done. I'm all about creative financing, creative thinking. But in that particular circumstance, I didn't anticipate the headaches that would come with that type of property and that type of economic burden.
So did you end up making money on the deal when you sold it?
I did a little bit. Not so. Yes, it sold for over the purchase price that I paid for it, but because so just to backtrack, the owner financing deal that I put together allowed me to pay off the loan anytime. And the guy didn't like that, because lots of times when you do owner finance, the reason why these people are doing owner financing is because they love their property, they've worked in that property for many years, and they want to retire, but they need an income stream. So for some reason, like for me, I would say, give me the money now, but he wanted the income stream. So he was very unhappy that I sold it a few years later. But I did make I sold it for above what I paid for it, but I put a lot of money into the property. I didn't recoup all that back. These are lessons I wish I could have told myself. One of the things I did was I went in there, and on this property it was almost barren. There was a lot of dirt because at that time in the city of Ontario, they were trying to save water, so you couldn't water your lawn. And I'm always thinking, how can I increase rent? How can I increase rent, right? And there's common things that people do, like put up a gate and call it a gated community, etc. And I want to make it pretty. That's legitimately for a fourplex. That's legitimately like what people do. And so I wanted to make it beautiful. So I had this contractor come in, and they added these flowers, and it was like this garden style community. No, the neighborhood kids would just come trample over everything with their bikes, and they would stomp everything. And some of the tenants' kids would sit on broke the sprinkler, so all the flowers would die. And I just was thinking to myself, yeah, should have just put in turf, should have just put grass in there. So yeah, I put a lot of money into it, didn't recoup it all back, but honestly, with these things, just getting out of it was a win for me. So, and the amazing thing, let me tell you about fourplexes that a mentor had told me early on, is that it's amazing. These 2 to 4 units, there's so much of a headache, but people buy them all the time. And so there was this guy, his name was George. He made his entire living off of 2 to 4 units. He would get the list that most residential brokers know, which is from the title company of absentee ownership, 2 to 4 units, right? He had this little red postcard that said, "Are you tired of running your apartment building, fixing toilets?" Right? That's me, right? And he would send out these little red postcards, and you would get all these calls coming because everybody's trying to dump them. But he told me, Michael, it's amazing because as soon as I get them, I list them on the MLS, and so many people, they love investing in these 2 to 4 units. So I don't know. That was my experience. I don't think I would do it again. But yeah.
No, I appreciate you sharing that story, and it's one of the things that I like working with you so much is not only do you have this formal education, but you've been in the trenches, as a landlord and as an investor, which makes it much easier to relate when you're working with your clients. Let's switch gears for a sec and talk more about your work. So a lot of the audience who watches this show are rental property owners and landlords, real estate agents, these kind of folks. The environment in California can be very challenging for landlords. What are some tips that you have for rental property owners, as well as what are some of the biggest mistakes that you see investors making with their rentals here in California?
Sure. So right now in today's environment, not just in California, but nationwide, there's this pro-tenant sentiment in many states. California, I think, is leading the charge. Ever since the pandemic, these politicians, these legislators, they feel like they need to somehow protect tenants because they think that these evil, big, bad landlords are coming to try to take advantage of them by increasing rent to ridiculous levels. And that's just not what's happening, right? You know as well as I do, whether it's real estate sales, rentals, the price that buyers or renters pay is dictated by the market, right? But unfortunately, in many cities now in California, there are these Tenant Protection Act type of ordinances where they're capping the amount that you can raise rent. In fact, there's a proposal right now in the legislature that will not only apply this to single-family homes and condos, which currently it's exempt from, but even if somebody moves out, the next tenant that comes in, you can't raise it to market value. It's still a percentage of what the previous tenant had paid. We're fighting this as much as we can. What landlords can do right now, and I encourage all landlords across the country to do this, is to join your local apartment association or state apartment association. Here we have the California Apartment Association. We also have local apartment associations, rental housing associations. They put together these PACs, these legislators, these lobbyists to really fight these type of proposals and to fight for landlords. So that's the number one tip that I would encourage people to do. And also get educated if you're not part of an apartment association. And also make sure that you have a good attorney in your corner, somebody who is up to date on these laws and who can get things done quicker, because the laws are changing so quickly nowadays. And because many, especially smaller landlords, don't do that many evictions, they don't know what they don't know. So they might think, oh, I have to give, a 60-day notice, when, we have learned with our particular judges, you only need a 30-day notice, right? So finding a good law firm and joining your local apartment association are keys to success nowadays.
Yeah, let me ask you this: what do you think is the biggest misconception that landlords have about the eviction process?
Well, here in California, the biggest misconception is just like pre-pandemic. So in the old days, it was so easy to evict. 45 days, in and out, sheriff comes out, done. And it was cheap, $750, you're done. What many landlords don't understand is nowadays the court system has not caught up. Minimum, if it's an uncontested, meaning the tenant doesn't fight you in an eviction process, 120 days from beginning to lockout here in Orange County, here in Southern California, at least, because of court delays, sheriff's delays. It is going to cost you $2,000 or more. It's part of its inflation because court fees have increased, sheriff fees have increased, and some of it has to do with just let me give you an example. So here I cover I'm in the Irvine office. We have 5 offices statewide. So I cover Orange County and the Inland Empire. And I think a year or two ago, the sheriffs went to do a lockout, right, to kick the tenant out because the tenant wasn't paying. I don't care if you evict me, you got to kick me out. So normally the sheriffs would come in, they would post a sign on the door, and they would, force the tenant out. Well, in that part of the Inland Empire, there were a lot of gangs. Because on the notice, it tells them exactly when the sheriffs are coming. They were ambushed. There were officers hurt. So nowadays, they go in force. They don't tell the tenant exactly what day they come in. They have the entire force out there, so it takes longer to do the sheriff's lockout because they can't. They have to do it all together at once. So these type of things make things delayed. So I think nowadays a lot of landlords are not aware of the length of time, the cost it takes to do an eviction.
Let me ask you this. So I have heard from other people, and I've been personally tempted myself that when you have one of these problematic tenants, it seems a lot of people are to just take this into your own hands, and kind of sort of informal justice to deal with a problematic tenant. What kind of liability is a landlord exposing themselves to if they try to sort of circumvent the court process in terms of getting a tenant out?
Yeah, I get that question a lot, actually, once people hear about the cost and the timeline, because after all, 120 days is 120 days you're not collecting rent, right? And there's a cost as well because if the tenant fights you. And nowadays, that's the other thing that most landlords don't know. Nowadays, tenants are fighting. In the old days, it was easy. You had a law firm representing the landlord, and the tenant was unrepresented. It's like if you try to negotiate against a lawyer's going to clean your clock every time. Nowadays, here in Orange County, here in Southern California, a lot of these tenants are getting legal aid to represent them, and now they're fighting these evictions. And you have places like Sacramento, where there's a right to counsel, and LA starting to go that way. Right to counsel means they're guaranteed a lawyer. Okay, tenants guaranteed a lawyer that they do not have to pay for, that the government pays for. And so when these things become contested, when tenants fight the eviction, now you're talking $7,000, $10,000, 9 months, the tenants in the property not paying rent. So sometimes landlords say, what can I do? And I cannot advise them to do anything illegal. So I just say, don't do anything illegal. But there is liability there. You can't just, shut off the water, change the keys. You're not allowed to do those type of things. There could be criminal liability. There could be civil liability, lawsuits against you. Yeah, I do not take matters into your own hands in that way. However, there is a middle ground in between, and that's called working things out with a tenant. And I know landlords, are sitting there, I try to get the tenant to pay. They haven't paid. What do you mean work it out? And what I mean is, and real estate brokers know that, cash for keys, right? So try to negotiate, I will pay you to get out, right? Don't, and make sure, otherwise, if you try to force people, you've heard the stories. People are taking out copper pipes, reselling the scrap metal because copper is valuable, pouring cement down the sink. You don't want any of that. You want to get the number one thing that you want with eviction is actually not the money. You want possession. You want that turnover so you can rent that again at market rate as quickly as possible. So if you don't want to go through the eviction process, I encourage people to try to work things out with their tenant.
Yeah, I'll tell you that is something that I have sort of developed like a pretty sophisticated skill for, is that we, fortunately at our management company, have never had to go the distance on an eviction. However, on multiple occasions, I've sat in the dining room with the tenant and sort of helped them have that come to Jesus moment about you are eventually going to lose this battle, and so why permanently sabotage your ability to get housing in California, but by messing up your credit and messing up your record, and let me help you out of this difficult situation. And we've been fortunate that the tenants who were problematic have reformed themselves, and we've been able to get possession back. Excellent. Well, this is tons and tons of quality information. I do know that you're on a time schedule here, so let's wrap things up. Let me ask you this. Based on your wealth of experience, if someone was just getting into the journey that you're on, what kind of advice would you have for new people who are getting into this business?
If you're getting to the real estate business, whether it's as a service provider like I am, whether you're getting into brokerage, you're getting into investments, I recommend that you find a mentor. That was something that I didn't find out the value of until much later in my career. Find somebody who currently is where you want to be, and do whatever it takes to have them take you under their wing. And so finding a mentor who has been there, who has all the war stories, who can guide you is really, really the way to go. And yeah, absolutely, awesome. Find a mentor.
And if folks want to reach out with you to do some kind of business, who are you looking for, and what is the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Sure. Obviously, we work with property management companies. We currently represent some of the largest property management companies, not just in California, but across the nation. Our clients include publicly traded REITs as well as privately held companies. But I'm really looking at this point to network. Real estate's a contact sport. So anybody out there who has any interest in what we do, or if you want a referral in the real estate space, real estate law space, or you'd like to connect with me, feel free to connect with me. But in terms of clients, we deal primarily with property management companies, as well as some syndication ownership groups. But yeah, we're here for you.
Excellent. And we'll go ahead and put your contact information up on the screen when we do the edit. In terms of people reaching out, what channel is best for you?
The best is actually LinkedIn. LinkedIn has actually become more and more of a communications channel for me. I'm getting requests for opening new cases, for requests to connecting with an attorney, and I am on there all the time. So if you can put my LinkedIn as a link there, I invite everybody to connect with me. You can also reach out to our offices and ask for me, Michael Chen. Our website is www.kts-law.com. And yeah, feel free to connect with me.
All right, fantastic. Well, Michael, it really has been a pleasure chatting with you. Any final words?
Any final words? Wow. Well, the one thing that I've learned throughout my career is that motivation and persistence is really the key to success. We didn't cover this in interview, but for a brief stint, I worked in a law school, and my job was to help the law students find jobs, right? And I used to tell the students, you can't predict the future, but you can plan for the future. Ever since COVID, I think we all learned a lesson that anything can happen at any time. So my new motto is that you can't predict the future, but you can try to plan for it as best you can, and try to prepare, try to have a plan, try to find mentors, and just keep going. And yeah, I encourage everybody to stay motivated and go after what you want.
Hell yeah, that's super inspirational. All right, well, thank you so much, Michael. It's really been a pleasure having you on. All right, guys, that is a wrap of episode number 5 of the Easy Deals podcast. We will catch you on the next one.